Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we are in this really very interesting chapter in Deuteronomy, where prior to going out to battle, the assembled army is collected, and we see this. I don't know if I want to call it a ritual ceremony where the priests speak to the nation, the assembled, the gathered troops, and as you'll see, the nature of that speech to them. First of all, to encourage them very much and not to be dismayed by what appear to be stronger numbers and stronger armaments, etc., and to realize that is not what ultimately gives victory or gains victory in a battle. So let's keep going. All right, so here we are. V'haya, and it shall be, v'koravchem el hamilchama, as you draw near to battle, v'nigash hakohen v'diver el ha'am. I think this actually should be v'diber et ha'am, at least according to the rules of grammar that I know. And of course, the text that we have here, the printing is not always that clear, and something like simply a point could well be missing. But I'd have to check with a tikkun and see. But that would make sense because it's following this vowel here. And normally this vowel would be followed by a closed syllable. And ver, that bet is opening a new syllable, meaning this would be an open syllable, whereas dib bear is like the dot doubles the bet. You'll excuse me for the grammar lesson, so that it would become vedib bear is actually grammatically how it would be understood. Vedib bear. So anyway, let's take a look. So what does this mean? So we said as you draw near to the battle, the Kohen should draw near and speak to the people. You should go over and speak to the people. Here we go. Rashi, kekoravchem, right? El hamilchama, when you draw close to the battle. So he says, Samuch letzeitchem min hasfar, means very close as when you have gone beyond the border. Safar would be the border. Migvul artzachem. And again, he explains, literally, this could be an editorial comment, who knows, but it says from the border of your land. So as you have done this. So this doesn't sound necessarily like a war of defense. There were wars that they waged to enlarge their land at times. And this sounds like this particular situation. However, it's quite possible that we are also certainly talking about wars of defense. So, V'nigash HaKohen, the priest should go over, and this is to be found in this is the Talmudic reference that Rashi is using in the tractate Sota 42. Hamashuach lachach. So it means who was anointed for this purpose. So and I'll keep going. For who nikra, and he is referred to as Mashuach Milchama, as the one anointed for war. So this is an interesting bit of information that you may not have known about, is that there was a priest who was appointed for the very purpose of going out to battle with them. And the anointment, in other words, the idea of pouring oil over this person's head to anoint them, is to put them in a very unique position and to honor them in that particular way. So the act of anointing essentially is honoring a person with a particular task and a particular position. V'diber elaham, and he should speak to the people. And he says, Belashon HaKodesh. So also in the Sota, it says he should speak to them in Hebrew, So it's possible that Rashi's understanding this v'diber, right? Even though normally it doesn't necessarily mean in Hebrew, but it could be that what follows, right? In other words, it's going to say what he says to them. We're going to hear that in a moment, that's what he speaks needs to be what is going to be following in the Hebrew. Amar alehem, and he should say to them, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. Atem krevim hayom, you are drawing near today. Lemilchama al oivechem, to battle against your enemies. Al yerach levavchem, do not let your hearts not be weak. In other words, be courageous. Al tir'u, do not fear. Va'al tachpez, I think it's tachpezu. You should not become excited. You shouldn't panic. You shouldn't lose your sense of control, self-control, etc. Va'al ta'artzu mipnehem, and do not dread from them. Do not dread of them. So the major Rashi on this, we'll take a look. So as to why these particular verbs are chosen in this sense, and why does the priest use this particular language to say that there's a lot of thoughtfulness and mindfulness given to the words that the priest is saying. So, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, afilu ein bachem zechut, even if you have no merit, Ella Kriyat Shema, except for the fact that you recite the Shema, Bilvad, alone. So some interesting things here being said, right? So first of all, the idea that this phrase Shema Yisrael, of course, and I'm sure when I read this, you also immediately thought of the Shema, and to understand that this particular terminology is to do everything he can to give them reassurance. And the idea that even just saying Shema Yisrael, that phrase, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is so foundational. It is the absolute essence of what our religion is about. And to say that even if they had no other merit, because remember, we do believe that God is a God of justice, and the idea is that if one is worthy as a human being of winning the battle, God will help you win the battle, and if you're not worthy, ultimately you will lose the battle. So we look to see, and certainly in performing a positive commandment, like reciting Shema Yisrael every morning and every evening, right? That's when we talk about Kriyat Shema, the recitation of the Shema. So we are talking not just saying Shema Yisrael, period, but understanding that as the fulfillment of a mitzvah, a commandment to recite the Shema. So that would be in the morning and in the evening. Right? However, it is so important, he's saying, Kidai atem, you still would be worthy, She Yoshia etchem, that he should save you, that God should save you. So I think it's actually an important principle of the idea that while we believe that God is loving and merciful to a great, great degree, we still feel that there's an obligation on our part as human beings to find ways in which to deserve all the blessings that come our way. And so that's part of the idea of the structure of how our religion works. Al oivechem, right? To battle against your enemies. So this is in some ways an explanation, I've referred to it before, of the way in which the enemy was going to be treated, because essentially it was going to be annihilated. And this is the rationale. Two wrongs don't make a right, but the issue is that if somebody is coming to kill you, you have the right to kill them first. So, Ein elu achichem, these are not your brothers. She'im tiplu biadam, that in the circumstance, in the case where you fall into their hands, einam merachamim aleichem, they will not show you any mercy. These people will show you no mercy. Ein zu kemilchemet Yehuda im Yisrael. This is not like the war of Judah against Israel. right? There was a time, of course, after King Solomon, when the kingdom split into two, the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes known as Israel, and the two southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin that formed Judah. And these two areas were in constant conflict with one another. And there's a lot of symbolism involved, I think, in that fact, in that we were not united from that time. And this isn't the place for me necessarily to go into it, but I think it has a great deal of significance. Shinemar, as it states. So now let's hear. So they were, at one point, they battled each other. And this is a reference to the book of Chronicles, the second book of Chronicles, chapter 28. Vayakum, he's quoting, Vayakumu anashim, and the people arose, asher nikbu b'shemot, who were detailed by their names. They were appointed by their names. Vayachaziku b'shivya, and they took hold of the shivya is the people that were left from the battle. Okay. V'kol ma'arumehem hilbishu me'arumehem, and all those of them who were naked, hilbishu, they dressed, they gave them clothing, min hashlal, from the booty, vayalbishum, and they dressed them, vayan ilum, and they gave them shoes to wear, vayachilum, and they fed them, vayashkum, and they gave them to drink, vayaskum, and I think this means they put oil on them. In other words, they tried to make them feel more refreshed. Vayen halum bechamorim, and they led them on donkeys. L'chol koshel, in other words, the ones who were injured, right? They put on donkeys. Vayaviim Yericho, and they brought them to Jericho, Ir HaTamarim, the city of dates or date palms. So this is how the victors treated the vanquished in this particular case, in this war of Israel and Judah. Etzel achehem, near to their brothers, vayashuvu shomrom, and then they returned to Samaria. So Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom. So I believe that Jericho would have been in the area of Judah. And I think this is basically saying, it sounds to me as if Judah had lost the battle against Israel, and those of Israel treated their vanquished, the people they conquered in this particular way. And the point, of course, that Rashi's making is that the people here in this context that they're going out, that we're talking about right now in Deuteronomy, aren't going to behave that way. Ela al oivechem atem holchim, but against your enemies you are going. Lefichach, and for this reason, hitchasku lemechama, make strong your battle. Al yerach levachem, let your hearts not be softened, meaning al tiru. Okay, we're going on. Al tiru v'al tichpazu v'al ta'artzu. So here he's going into the various verbs being used. And in Sota, again, in this particular tractate on page 42, Arba Azharot. In other words, there are four warnings that the priest is giving these people. Keneged, and why these four different warnings? Keneged Arba'a Dvarim. It is to correspond to the four ways, Shemalchei Umot Haolam, in which the sovereigns of the nations of the world, essentially, basically, it's using that as a literary expression, meaning, non-Jewish armies, right? Osim, or they do. What did the four things they do? Magifim betrisehem, they strike on their shields, they make a noise with their shields, kedei lahakishan ze lazeh, in order to smack one against the other, kedei lahashmia kol, so as to uh, to cause a sound to be heard. In other words, to make a tremendous sound of the rattling of their shields. In other words, we're talking here about some psychological warfare. Sheyachbazu, right? So that it should terrify, right? Elu shekenegdam, the people who are opposed to them. V'yanusu, and they will flee. V'rom, so that's one thing. V'romsim besusehem, and they make their horses trample, right? Beat the ground. Umatzhilim otam, and they cause them to make a sound. In other words, cause them to neigh, make the horses sound out. Lahashmiya kol, in other words, to be heard. Excuse me, it looks like she'ata parsot susehem. So kol she'ata, in other words, the noise of the beating of their hoofs, susehem, of their horses. That's another thing. V'tzovchin b'kolam, and they scream out with their voices. V'tokim b'shofrot, and they blare out with their trumpets. Umine mashmi'ei kol, and other various ways in which to make sounds. Al yerach levachem, do not allow your hearts to be soft. Mitzahalot susim, in other words, from the sounds of the horses. Al tirau, do not fear. Mehagafat hatrisim, do not fear from the striking of their shields. Al tachpazu, in other words, again, don't be scared. Mikol hakranot, from the sounds of the horns, of the trumpets. Ve'al ta'atzu, and remember, do not be in dread. Mikol hatzvacha, from their yelling out and their cries, their shouts. Why not? Okay. Ki Hashem Elokechem, for the Lord your God, haolech imachem, who goes with you, lahilachem lachem, to battle on your account, im oivechem, with your enemies, etchem, and to save you. Ki Hashem Elokechem, etc. Heim ba'im. So the point of the sentence, Rashi is saying, is they come benitzchono shel basar adam. They come for the triumph of flesh and blood. In other words, for mortal triumph. They're coming to gain mortal triumph. Va'atem ba'im nitzchono shel makom. But you come for the sake of the triumph of God, makom, the place, right? Plishtim ba'u, and as an example, the Philistines came benitzchono shel Goliath. They came for the triumph of Goliath. Ma hayasofo, and what was the end? What was the end of Goliath? Nafal, he fell, v'naflu imo, and so they fell with him. Ha'olech imachem, so he goes with you, God goes with you. Ze machane ha'aron. So what do you mean by God going with them? And that is because they would take an ark with them, or the ark with them, when they went into battle. So that is this encampment that included the ark that went into battle with them. And let's see, so we will stop here for today and hopefully continue next time. Let me put the place. Sorry. My apologies. Let's go in here and mark the spot. And we'll pick up next time. Oops, sorry. Pick up next time right there. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. So any thoughts, any comments on what we've done today? Harlan, you want to come off mute?
The army commanders told the soldiers that if they're building a new home,
Yes.
to leave it, otherwise somebody else will.
You're anticipating what's coming up.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's going to come up. Exactly right. So hopefully next time we will actually go into that.
Okay, good.
But they start by reassuring them that they will be victorious. They will be victorious. Judith, did you have anything you wanted to add? Okay, I saw you were off mute. All right, I will stop the recording.